The Boss Hole Chronicles are brought to you by Real Good Ventures, a talent optimization firm helping organizations diagnose their most critical people and execution issues with world-class analytics. Make sure to check out all the resources in the show notes and be sure to follow us and share your feedback. Enjoy today's episode.
Welcome back to the Boss Hole Chronicles. This is Sarah Best. I'm your co-host, joined as always today by my partner in crime, Mr. John Brower. Good afternoon, John. How are you?
I'm well, Sarah. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm really good. And I'm excited that in our conversation today with our subject matter expert, we're going to move in a direction we haven't gone before. And our listeners can take time to appreciate and understand board leadership, not just organizational leadership, but the critical element of leadership that most private organizations and even nonprofits experience, which is a board and governance. So excited to delve into this today.
Oh, I think it's going to be an amazing topic. And again, we talk about boss hole prevention, boss hole intervention, usually and almost exclusively in the corporate realm. But yes, our guest today, our subject matter expert today, is going to be able to take us into that world of board governance and just the unique nature of that. And Sarah, just with your background too, I'm excited to have the two of you talking, but I am pleased to welcome Dr. Hassell McClellan. Hassell, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Oh, John, thank you very much. And Sarah, it's a pleasure to be here today. And thank you for having me on your on this podcast. And it's a very interesting topic. And I look forward to hopefully sharing a few insights, if not wisdom, at least some experience.
Oh, no doubt. I no doubt. And let's talk a little bit about that wisdom and experience and where it comes from. Dr. McClellan has served as an independent board member of the John Hancock Group of Funds Board since 2005 and was named chairperson of the Board of Trustees in 2017. And Hassell, you and I have been working together on your board work, specifically around the operational DNA of the board. That's a term that you have coined, but we've been doing this for about 3 or 4 years. Furthermore, he was a professor of finance and policy and associate dean at Boston College's Wallace E. Carroll School of Management and has been a director of both public and privately held companies. Hassell specializes in strategic management and has a Doctor of Business Administration from the Harvard Business School and MBA in finance and marketing from the University of Chicago and a bachelor's degree in economics and mathematics from Fisk University. How is it that we keep getting these slackers on this podcast? I'm telling you, it's just amazing to me. He's authored several articles and case studies, as well as a book on the banking industry called Managing One Bank Holding Companies, and he has served on a number of boards. So this is truly a subject matter expert around working in and developing boards. So once again, Hassell, great to have you here. We're excited to learn more from you.
Thank you, John.
Let's jump right in, Dr. McClellan. And I think that the best place to start would be to understand from your perspective, how you look at board participation. So being a board member for a privately held enterprise or a nonprofit, there's a distinction that you have. Share that with us.
Well, one of the things that, Sarah, that when you think about boards, I think, unfortunately, people tend to somehow differentiate and think that nonprofit boards and for-profit boards exist in two different universes, or parallel universes, as opposed to my view and experience over time is they really are on a continuum. They're at opposite ends of a line that's connected, and that they are actually more commonalities than there are differences between for-profit boards or mission-driven boards, what people like to call them, and for-profit boards. The first thing is that any organization, for-profit, nonprofit, always has a mission. It is mission-driven. It has a strategy. It has to have a strategy. Unfortunately, I think all too often, nonprofit boards, they have the mission part, but they miss out on the strategy part and getting people committed to the strategy and strategic implementation.
Right.
And for boards on their continuum, you're starting to see, for example, a lot of nonprofit boards actually begin to move towards the notion of having for-profit or revenue-generating activities so they can become self-sustaining as opposed to relying upon the vagaries of fundraising, hand to mouth. And so by recognizing that we can have auxiliary activities that generate revenue for us that makes us sustainable and independent, and isolate us from the vagaries of the fundraising market. You're seeing nonprofit boards move in that direction. Likewise, you're also seeing corporations and for-profits move in the direction of broadening the notion of shareholders into stakeholders. And in terms of how do we fit within a broader community, we exist and operate in environments where we have to pay attention to things outside of what we traditionally think of as the corporate, shareholders and within our community. Corporations exist in broad communities. ESG has certainly brought that to the forefront, because we talk about governance and the impact upon the social and environmental. Those things make the move apart together. I actually, in my strategic management class when I was teaching, I used to talk about, ask the students a question of what is a nonprofit? And everyone would talk about, well, it has a mission, it does this. And I would say often, no, it's simply just a tax designation. That's all it is.
Right.
I said, as far as it has to operate, it has all of the same needs and requirements of a for-profit entity.
Right.
It's all too often board members don't bring that perspective, and they don't operate like that. They somehow view it as something unique and cause related, as opposed to you have a mission and you have to have strategic objectives. You need to measure your movement and accomplishment of those missions just like any other entity if you're going to be successful and effective.
Yeah. So first key takeaway that I hear, Dr. McClellan, is, hey, if you're serving on a nonprofit board, see your role as instrumental in solidifying, the enterprise as a whole. Not just being connected to the mission. That's important, of course. But what's even more important is being on purpose and strategic about how the relationships happen, how the board is formed. And there's a differentiation there. I appreciate that. Good stuff.
And doesn't this, one of the terms that you used, Hassell, was that a board, wherever it may land on the spectrum, needs to be a strategic asset. Help our listeners understand what that means in your world.
Any entity, whether it's a nonprofit or for-profit, for example, one of the primary roles you have, one of the responsibilities you have is to be a fiduciary. You have a fiduciary responsibility for that organization. And one of the biggest and most significant challenges for a board and responsibilities is also the hiring and firing of the CEO. In addition to helping to set, the strategy and to approve and providing oversight, but hiring and firing the CEO. And in that process, a CEO can only be as successful as its board. A board has to help a CEO be successful, both in terms of providing oversight for the type of things they do, but also being a strategic asset for them in a lot of different ways. One of which is advice, in that you are a sounding board. You are a board that can also be the generator of innovative ideas, as well as people inside the organization. Because as a board member, you often bring unique perspectives that individuals inside an organization don't see or get blinded. You think about often what I found and work with companies strategically is that when you start doing strategic plans and you're trying to look forward and do scenarios inside the organization, there's an unconscious mentality that you are defending what you have. It's a defensive posture. How do we protect our market share? How do we continue to do what we do? How do we extrapolate from where we are to the future? In other words, building upon what we do. And it becomes incremental. So often what is required for long-term survival is not incrementalism. It's the ability to know when to transform the organization and go through strategic transformation into new areas. You see it in the corporate world, in terms of digitalization, companies in financial services, companies that banks used to be banks. Now you have financial services firms. Companies are having to become digital. If you think about retailing, the companies that are surviving are the companies that have made commitment to online and retailing and digitalization. The thing that board members can often do is to bring that outside perspective, a cross-pollination. You come from a variety of different industries, you have different experiences, and so you can see how what you do over here can actually serve this company over here that you serve on, even though they're not doing it. You can see around the corners a little better sometimes because you're not committed to defending where you are. You're often willing to say, hey, we need to think about cannibalizing a part of our business or harvesting that part of the business so that we can invest in where we need to be in order to survive and sustain ourselves. That is a skill that is an attribute that board members can bring as a strategic asset, both for the president as well as for the company. The perspective, as well as particular thinking in terms of oversight, can really help organizations overcome inertia. Because you remember the laws of physics, things at rest want to stay at rest. Things in motion want to stay in motion. Sometimes you need that extra catalyst, just like everything else. You need that catalyst to keep it going. If you're driving a car, it takes more energy to start a car, and you have to do something proactive to start it. Once it's started, it runs on its own. And then you have to be proactive to stop it.
Right.
The thing I like about electric vehicles is that they do stop on their own, but that's a whole new another ball game.
That's a whole new technology, right? Yeah.
It requires a certain amount of energy and thinking to help an organization stop going down a road that is not necessarily best for the future,
right?
As well as to begin to turn and go down the right roads and move away from the path you're on. Boards can be very helpful at those kind of key inflection points.
So let's dig into that. And our listeners love examples, Hassell. And you and I've been in the front row of witnessing your role as a catalyst with the John Hancock Mutual Fund Board, and just what you've done in the last few years. And I think this now allows us to talk a little bit more about what you refer to as operational DNA, or the culture, the heart and soul of a board. And at the same time, realizing it's made up of individual members who have their own behavioral DNA. And of course, this is the world we love to delve into. And just for our listeners already know, we work with Predictive Index. There are a lot of different tools out there, but in this particular case, you worked very specifically with that platform. And actually look in the show notes because there's an article referencing this work. But two things stood out for me, Hassell, as I witnessed your role as a catalyst with this board. Two things is you knew that looking in the future, there were members of the board that were going to be stepping off, and you needed to do two things. You needed to replace and you needed to enhance. Those are two words that you shared with me that I thought were so profound. Just help our listeners understand, in this case with this board, where replacing and enhancing really helped to shape that path.
John, this is a very topic that's been very dear to me as a chair, as you know, and working with you and your team through this process has been very helpful. One of the first things that underpins my approach and thinking is that as a chair of a board or leadership of a board, much like the CEO of a company, one of your primary responsibilities is to ensure that you have continuity in terms of the people and the resources you have on the board. And succession is critical because you have people retiring from the board. And a board is like any other kind of organization. If you think about a board, and I like to think as almost like an organizational chart. I know Sarah talks about architecture, which is really important. But I can build, the basic architecture of a board, and you look at that architecture. And then, though, you have to look at the materials. I mean, it is as important as the structure, the rooms, all the things you build. You also have to look at what kind of materials you're going to use to make that architecture come alive and to work. And so, when I think about the materials, those are those internal, intrinsic qualities that people bring around the specific skill set in the architecture. John, as you know, I'm a big basketball fan growing up in
Mhm.
Kentucky, and you have to be. And but I found over time, and for example, in playing sports and things in college, I look at winning, for example, winning teams, and it's interesting that you look at professional basketball teams. You can almost have it like an organizational chart. There are certain roles that have to be played, and you need to have a balance of those on a team. And we've talked about this, that any successful team, you've got to have a very good shooter.
Mhm.
You've got to have a very good ball handler. You've got to have somebody who rebounds. You've got to have a person who can defend and shut down the other person's offensive player. So you got to have a good rebounder, a good shooter, a good defender, a good ball handler, all of those things.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing about it is, those boxes all have to be there.
Right.
Those boxes are described, but the type of person you put in those boxes is what makes it work.
Mhm.
So we can design the board. And so you need to have the mentality, because you can get the wrong person. If you have a team of all Steph Currys, that's not going to work, because there's only, you can't have, somebody's got to rebound and pass the ball.
Right.
And so you need to have the kind of quality of a person. When you're thinking about, I want a person that's a good rebounder. You need to have a person whose mindset is, I'm not interested in scoring. I'm not interested in shooting. My joy comes out of getting the rebound.
Mhm.
A Dennis Rodman, when he used to play basketball. But you look at every team, and they always had those. And so I think about a board in the same way. We have individuals, and this will lead us into kind of the work that we did together.
Mhm.
You need individuals who can do everything, and then you get that on the board, but they have a natural inclination to think broadly, visionary, strategically, because they're the ones constantly driving and moving the board in a catalytic way. You also need people who are concerned about process.
Right.
Concerned about that, they love making sure that the details and things are in place, and the functioning, and that we're following processes. You also need people who are connectors as a primary thing, that really everybody on the board connects with, and they can do and say things that other people might not, that they have relationships with on the board. Because you'll find on a board, one person may connect with a specific person more so than everybody else on the board. But you always want to have those 2 or 3 people that everybody, and they connect with everybody.
Mhm.
And so they bring together, and when you're in meetings, they're the ones that can have a sense for keeping people together when you're dealing with very tough issues and opposing views.
Mhm.
And because quite often the strong personalities, it's not always they're the ones that are the connectors. It's those persons that on the board that nobody wants to disappoint.
Right.
Everybody wants to make sure that they're happy. And so that they can play the role of tampering down dissension when it comes across, of soothing feelings and making sure that people are aware. And so you build a board around, in my view, the materials as well as the basic architecture of the building. If I want to, Sarah, I love the word, using the word architecture. But if I'm building a two-story building, I need to use different kind of materials than I do necessarily in a single one floor building, because I don't have the need for a certain kind of strength that you need to support a second floor on a building.
Yeah.
You have people who you have to replace because of retirements or for other reasons, health reasons, other people leave the board. You should think about not only the skill set that you're losing, that intellectual or the experience or the background that you're losing. How is that balanced on the board? Do you have more than one? And if you're losing an important skill set, and let's say that's around accounting or finance, how do you make sure that you replace that? But at the same time, you need to look at that intangible that the person with that skill set brings, because not all accountants are the same. Not all financial people or marketing people are the same in terms of their tendencies as individuals.
Right.
So if you have a person who's, let's say, that's been your chair of your audit committee, and they tend to be a very process-oriented person, you may get a person that has all the auditing experience, but they tend to be less so than this person
Mm-hmm.
in terms of their process-wise. And so you need to make sure that you're bringing both, as you talk about with what we use the predictive index, the heart and the portfolio or the briefcase.
Right.
That we have the skill set, but they're also the type of individuals that are going to replace those skill sets. But you also do strategic analysis of what do we need as a board to continue to be effective in the environment as the world changes around us? What are the new demands upon us as a board? And so therefore, what do we need to look at to enhance our board? Do we need to bring on, for example, that our board, the world is increasingly global.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be, it is a global environment. And so we decided that, okay, we wanted to bring on board, we looked and said, we don't have a lot of people. We have people who are engaged in doing things, but we don't have people on the board who have been immersed in global environments. And so one of the people we put on the board is the head of global regulatory policy for a major tech company.
Mm-hmm.
And another person is actually a foreign-born individual who is in finance in another country and here, and they have the experience of living and understanding and bringing that. And so we've made our board better and enhanced because of the kind of now the perspectives we bring of someone who's lived and worked in Singapore, lived and worked in Amsterdam,
Mm-hmm.
lived and worked in Peru. And that we now, as opposed to, we have individuals that have an appreciation and who live here and work and go there, but it's different. It's
right.
a different kind of perspective that now has enhanced our board.
Well, Hassell, I think what I think has been so remarkable in being part of this process with you. Well, let's go back. Our listeners are familiar with the head, the heart, and the briefcase. And you were absolutely, this is a great example of how you were not allowing that defensive posture to take hold. I mean, it's human nature to be, let's just keep things as they are. Let's keep it within these parameters because this is what we're used to. And you were ensuring that didn't happen. And quite frankly, I knowing the board members as I do, they totally embraced a broader view and a realization that not only do we have to replace people, but also how do we add to the culture of this board? How do we enhance it, to your point? And looking back, Hassell, yes, it's been over a year that we've really started to lay the groundwork, help the board in its, well, let's say at that time, its present state, understand itself, and then start to understand what future state is going to look like. But this was all done very thoughtfully and intentionally. And what a great result, too. I mean, you actually, and it's in the article in the show notes, you can check it out, but you were able to bring on 3 really remarkable individuals to the board.
Well, let me just say I'll say we as a board did it. I mean, it was.
That's correct. Yes.
I never take credit for it. It's, certainly it played a catalytic role, but as a board, again, I can only be as successful as my board, and I have a wonderful board.
Yeah.
And I try to be that, to provoke and to be the catalyst and to move it's in the right direction. But you're absolutely right. My view and experience is that it's important to build relational type activities as opposed to transactional. And that one of my goals was to recognize the value of the work that we could do and what you and Sarah and others could bring. That it was important to have you be embedded with us,
mm-hmm.
so that it's not just at the end. It's not that you know us. You're a part of us. There's a trust in both your judgment and what you're doing, and so that by embedding you with us over the year, it's consistent with what I try to do and I find being effective even with the board. One of the things that I do, for example, we put in place is that when we bring on a new board member, we have a policy that if a board member is retiring, that we always recruit to have that new board member have at least 1 year overlap of the board member that they're replacing.
Right.
Because if you want because we want that new board member to understand the culture, that they're coming into. And it's hard to understand the culture if you're a board member or any kind of organization and you don't know who the person you're replacing, how the board operated with that person. You didn't see the full culture. And so, it's nothing worse than sitting at a board meeting and someone says, oh, well, when Charlie was here, we used to do such and such.
Right.
Oh, they brought this, or even in social, as opposed to person has a year to observe how the board operates with Jim or Charlie or Mary or Susie or Sarah or John or Hassell. You see it, you experience it. And so there's a continuity that carries over with this one, because it's part of, to me, the onboarding process, the indoctrination into the culture, the being absorbed into the culture. And you want them to be absorbed in the culture of the board as it is, not have something missing and the person has to speculate as to who this person was and what impact they see, especially if they're being brought in
to
do some of those things. And you see what works.
Yeah, and they have the benefit of just living through that and experiencing it for a year. That's great.
If I'm a leader of an organization, a chief leader of a nonprofit or a for-profit, there's been some golden nuggets in your words of wisdom here, Dr. McClellan, that I think are important. One of them being, you started with this idea of a continuum, that there's a continuum of activities and engagements, some very similar among nonprofit boards all the way to corporate and private boards. I think the world needs to hear that, because you're right, that we presume they live in two separate worlds. Second takeaway is, board members need to be a strategic asset, and they can't all be the same. We have to draw for the unique needs of the organization. We have to draw from different talents, drives, needs, and that's a head, heart, and briefcase kind of assessment. But it's all on purpose and to help design this internal culture and establish what you refer to as operational DNA. Again, great advice for any chief leader, not just even a board member. I love the word catalyst. It's been a word we've used, certainly I've used in my past. And I think you as a catalyst, as a leader on the board being a catalyst, a chief leader being a catalyst, initiator of action, energy, those things are important. And this intentional, replace and enhance. So always looking at, well, this is what we needed 5 years ago. There's been a change and a shift. Here's what we need now. And being able to replace and enhance based on what those current needs are. I just think it's so great. And then you also touched very personally on that idea of connections and relationships. And it's not lost on us that you, in your board experiences, put forth effort to try to establish that. That's again, great advice for a chief leader who should be doing that with his or her leadership team as well. Good stuff today.
Thank you. It's both a pleasure to be here. And again, I think the thing that for boards, there's nothing more important than trying to figure out ways to be a strategic asset for not only the CEO, but for the organization overall. Because it's the organization to which you have the fiduciary responsibility. And there's no greater joy than being able to move an organization forward in a way that is consistent with the mission of the institution, as well as the strategic objectives that you may have for an organization.
I'm sure the organizations, the many, many organizations and teams that you have supported are so grateful to have your expertise and leadership.
No question. Well, Hassell, you know what? You know how much I enjoy our conversations. I'm just so glad our listeners have had a chance to meet you. And I would remind everybody, go check out the show notes, read the article. It is just a great story of how this particular board has evolved under the careful watch and care of Dr. Hassell McClellan. And it's just been great having you here.
Thank you. Thank you both. And it's been a pleasure. And I've enjoyed our conversation. And I do hope that something I've said has been beneficial to your listeners.
Absolutely. Thanks again. And we'll see you next time on the Boss Hole Chronicles.
We'd like to thank our guests today on the Boss Hole Chronicles. And if you have a Boss Hole Chronicles story of your own, please email us at mystory@thebossholechronicles.com. Once again, mystory@thebossholechronicles.com. hancock.com. We'll see you again soon.